Good morning, everybody. My name is Laurence, the General Secretary of Global Social Economy Forum. And I think you would remember all that we have started this year of 2018 in January with a very shocking report published by the Oxfam that I think some of you may know that 82% of the world wealth produced in last year went to only 1% of the most richest persons of this world. And 3.7 billion poor people who compose half of our humanity have not seen any increase of their wealth. And actually, I think this report also speaks about that just 4 days of income of one of the top 5 world ranking fashion company, the CEO would gain probably equivalent to 1 year's salary of garment worker working in Bangladesh. What I'm going to say is that growing income and wealth disparity, which is a main crisis or main challenge to be overcome if we would like to really meet the theme of the high-level political forum of this year, transformation towards more sustainable and resilient societies. We really have to work very seriously to tackle about growing inequalities and social exclusion. And I think that we think that there might be a more integral and coordinated approach to really look at links to be built between SDGs and some of those experiences already developed in various parts of the world. And I think today's section is going to explore, especially the case of social and solidarity economy as an intelligent means to localize SDGs, and especially not only through the national government, but also through a whole public, private, and community partnerships developed in various parts of the world. So I hope that we would really explore a little bit about how we could make these transformations towards more sustainable and resilient, inclusive societies. To start, I would like to invite Ambassador Sang-wook to give us an opening remark.
First of all, I would like to thank the UN-DESA, UNRISD, and GSEF, which was organized this important side event of the 2018 HLPF, for inviting me to give an opening remark this morning. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development sets out 17 goals to eradicate poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all. To realize these ambitious goals by 2030, we need an integrated, people-centered, and planet-sensitive approach that promotes inclusive development and mainstreams the concepts of equality, participation, and fair and sustainable growth. The 2018 HLPF is focusing on the 6 SDGs with the theme of transforming towards sustainable and resilient societies. Goal 11, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, is one of those goals we reviewed this year, and it is particularly relevant to social and solidarity economy, or SSE, which is firmly rooted in local context. SSE looks beyond narrow forms of economic development and seeks ways to make social and environmental improvements in people's lives. It is particularly well aligned with the commitment of the 2030 Agenda to achieve sustainable development in a balanced and integrated manner. SSE aims to tackle deeply rooted social and economic problems such as poverty and inequality by embracing those who are most marginalized in society. SSE organizations often also have strong environmental principles and goals. In emphasizing social and environmental objectives with economic activity, SSE can contribute to realizing the vision of the 2030 Agenda to strengthen sustainable development and leave no one behind. I am sure This side event will offer a valuable opportunity to explore the actual and potential roles of SSE in bringing about inclusive and sustainable development in local context by drawing on evidence from different countries and regions which attract a lot of attention from policymakers interested in the role of SSE in achieving SDGs in local context. Especially, I am very happy to see the new report on the role of SSE in achieving the Seoul's SDGs prepared by UNRISD, which will be launched here today. I hope policymakers and SSE actors around the world will draw lots of lessons and insights from the discussions we are going to have in this event today. So in closing, I very much look forward to inspiring and fresh ideas to move towards sustainable and resilient society. I thank you very much.
Ambassador, ladies, gentlemen, and colleagues, I would like to thank, first of all, the organizers of this event. And the topic of social and solidarity economy is really key for the well-being of people. And I would also like to thank our colleagues of UNRISD, that is the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, to partner with us with DESA and the division I lead, which is the Division for Inclusive Social Development. So we do have lots of things in common. I would like also to recognize how important global partnerships are if we really want to implement the 2030 Agenda and its 17 goals. And the same applies when it comes to partnerships at local level. If we think of, for instance, social enterprises partnering also with the public sector, say municipalities and their mayors, and how together they could elaborate plans of action in the various dimensions, economic, social, environmental, and therefore political and cultural. And this is actually what will help us then to measure also the impact of sound policies at local level. You know, we say from local to global, and this is actually what we are talking about today, I believe. If, as the ambassador said, you spoke about poverty and inequalities. If we are to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030, we are to find decent jobs for millions of the unemployed and people with vulnerable jobs, right? If we are to bring gender equality, if we want to protect the environment and take care of the climate, if we are to leave no one behind, we have to target and work with local communities. There is no way out. That's the way. So in this regard, the social and solidarity economy enterprises are to find places and spaces to become a driving force in bringing the sustainable development goals to communities around the world. Because their business model, which is guided by combining profit with a specific social impact objective, has proven to hold great potential in filling gaps left by local governments and institutions to address prevailing social, economic, and environmental challenges. And here I'm thinking about social enterprises, for instance, that can significantly contribute to the social, environmental, and economic justice, as it seems, because the objective is to positively impact the lives of all, particularly of those people who might be marginalized, or those groups of societies that live in rural or urban spaces. But I'm also thinking of young men and women, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, women, ethnic minorities, as well as older persons. And when we talk about social enterprises, they take care and they have a focus on people because they are people-centered, and therefore they take care and are interested in providing services and products and sharing the profit for the benefit of the community at the end. This is what they have in their heart. Now, the division I lead, inclusive social development, within the department, has the role to deal with the focal points of the department through the division that involve the whole and serve the whole United Nations system. And I'm talking about youth. The division I lead with the support of my colleagues on behalf of the department deals with young people for the whole United Nations system from the age of 15 to 25, older persons from the age of 65 above, persons with disabilities that are around 1.5 billion out of 7 billion people in the world, indigenous people who are around 400 million people, older persons, as I said, 65, beyond the age of 65. Now, if we think of the Asian and the Pacific region, 67% of the population of older persons in the next 20, 30 years will be living in Asian Pacific. And the real continent, the only region where young people keep growing in terms of numbers is Africa. In Africa, there are going to be additional 400 million young people by the year 2100 and 100, while the remaining part of the world is aging. So social enterprises and local communities have really to start paying lots of attention when it comes to social and solidarity economy. It's serious, and therefore social and solidarity economy is going to play a key role if we organize ourselves properly, starting from communities, small communities, up to the United Nations, where 193 countries to discuss global issues. So partnering is very important, I said initially. I would like to bring you two examples about the social enterprises and some activities that we are also organizing together with other colleagues of the United Nations systems, and I'm thinking about UNIDO. With UNIDO, which is the United Nations International Industrial Organization, Development and Industrial Organization, we are preparing a paper, a technical paper, that will be presented next year during the Commission for Social Development. And next year, the topic, the policy theme of the Commission for Social Development is addressing inequalities and challenges for social inclusion through fiscal, wage, and social protection policies. And this is again where, for instance, social enterprises can play a major role. During 2008, when there was the financial crisis, global crisis, the only groups that were resilient and made it through were, for instance, one specific kind of social enterprises, cooperatives. Cooperatives are banks, are universities, but cooperatives can be also universities. For instance, the University in Nairobi is created by cooperatives. So cooperatives are social enterprises in so very different domains, and they work a lot at local level, and they can be key when it comes to, for instance, agriculture. If we think of agriculture and the role, many cooperatives of peasants are in rural areas. And here we have to engage young people to understand how important social and solidarity economy, thanks to the cooperatives, is. And young people are getting away from cooperatives, from this kind of social enterprises. So there are major private companies multinational companies that depend on the production of certain foods, say nuts, coffee, cacao. They work very closely with these social enterprises. And actually, some of these major companies are training young people, what they call the farmers of tomorrow, showing young people, new generations, when new technologies are available that are sustainable and also respect the environment and our health. And at the same time, these companies can keep producing through social enterprises, through cooperatives, led by young people, the products that we need to run a healthy life. But I can also think about other kinds of cooperatives, such as housing cooperatives, that help ensure safe dwellings. Utility cooperatives that are engaged in the transition to cleaner electricity and rural access to energy and water. These are just a few examples of what cooperatives, as a group of social enterprises that focus on social and solidarity economy, can do to localize the SDGs and to build resilient and sustainable societies. I would like to conclude by telling you that the brand of our division is 3 I's. The first I, the second I, the third I, wisdom. No, I'm joking. No, it's 3 I's, but really it's 3 I's. The first I is for inclusion. The third I is inequalities, reduction of inequalities. And the third I is impact. And we have noticed, and we know, and it has been shown with the business model that social enterprises have, that they do have an impact at local level, at regional level, and at international level. Thank you so much.
We have two panelists who are going to show about concrete experience developed by specific territories in Canada, especially in Quebec as well as Seoul. Let me first invite Professor Marguerite Mendell, Professor Emerita of the Concordia University in Montreal. She's really going to show how the social solidarity economy is not just an economy of poor people or as a side, one sector of economy, but it works as a policy for transformative changes that is rooted in territory that brings to a sustainable development.
First of all, I want to thank my colleagues Ilkang and Laurence, GSEF and UNRISD and DESA for inviting me to participate in this event. You notice I used first names because we have been working together over many years, crisscrossing across continents and countries, working within international organizations in those contexts, and then coming back into our national context. In my case, Canada. I'm Canadian, and I come from Montreal, from Quebec. Sharing our experiences in the social and solidarity economy has been invaluable, and it has allowed us to really evaluate the potential of this economy, which I will discuss with you over the next few minutes. I do also want to just say that I'm an academic. I'm in a university, but I'm in a university, and there are a growing number of universities now that really foster and favor and promote engaged research. So the work I've been doing now for more than 3 decades has really been informed by the actors and practitioners and representatives of large international organizations with whom I've had the privilege to collaborate, and who have also welcomed our students into their respective environments. So we're training a lot of young people, not just to do empirical work, I mean that is something that young people are accustomed to, but actually engage on a regular basis with practitioners, so that you're in a partnership research framework. So all the work I've done and what I will describe to you really is the result of collective work. Today it's Today I'm the messenger, but it could very well have been one of my practitioner colleagues who'd be standing in front of you, or for that matter, one of our graduate students. So we work collectively. So I'd like to just go back to some basics, because what we've discovered really almost everywhere that we go is either insufficient understanding or sometimes misunderstanding of what the social and solidarity economy really is. I was delighted to listen to you, Daniela, and Bas, with your comments that make me feel very happy that the work that you are doing in your division is really moving in important directions. But the reality is that while many of us know and understand what the social and solidarity economy is, it's not on the margins, but this is a side event. It very often is on the side when major challenges are discussed, including inequality and inclusion, etc. And we have to bring it more to the center. We have worked really hard to mainstream the social and solidarity economy, not to make it look like the mainstream, but to bring it into discussion at the policy level. And that's what I will share with you, because Quebec is a small place. We have almost less than 8 million people, but we have managed to bring the social and solidarity economy really into the center of policy discussions. So, I won't repeat what Daniela and Bas just shared with us, but if you look at this first slide, the social and solidarity economy are responding to the issues that she raised. But the social and solidarity economy is also creating to wealth creation. It's a different definition of wealth creation, and increasingly it is recognized as an economic actor, and I underscore that, because very often social solidarity economy is hived off into the social sector. Of course, it has social objectives and it has social criteria that are very dear to the social economy, but it is an economic actor. It is bringing a new model of wealth creation to society. And increasingly, governments that are trying to deal with the complex problems that are very difficult to solve and that are embedded in the SDGs, governments realize that binary state-market relations are inadequate to be able to achieve those goals. And as we just heard, and as I welcome and rejoice in hearing, the SDGs, all of them, are embedded in the social and solidarity economy, and these objectives can be achieved locally. Doesn't mean they can all be achieved at once, but we are not looking at specific objectives. Social and solidarity economy is the result of action, collective action on the part of civil society organizations over many, many years. The cooperative movement, which was referred to, goes back to the middle of the 19th century, the Rochdale cooperators. The mutual associations go back to the 18th century. There have been very concerted actions to create collective responses to needs. Today, I would add to needs that are not being met neither by the market nor the state, aspirations and hopes. Young people who want to live and work differently, who are committed to an ethical economy, who wish to introduce democracy into economic decision-making, who want to have people-centered economies. These are aspirations. They are choosing to work collectively. They are choosing different models, economic models. There are different terms now to refer to local economy, SDGs that are being met locally by the social and solidarity economy. I just introduced a few of these. The proximity economy, which is clear. Place-based strategies. There's been lots of discussion of place-based strategies for many years by many governments and international organizations. And increasingly the generative economy, which is about these aspirations, new forms of organizing, the social enterprise model, and so on. And increasingly, there is support by local governments. But what I would like to emphasize is that while the enterprises themselves are innovating and have introduced a new business model, we have to go beyond the enterprises to look at the social and solidarity economy systemically. So I would like to make reference here to, I think, for me and for others, was a watershed moment by UNRISD when it created the United Nations Task Force on Social and Solidarity Economy a few years ago. There are now 18 member organizations in this task force, and it's a demonstration of the need to work across boundaries. Those 18 organizations include the FAO, UNIFAM, UNIDO, UNCTAD, etc., etc. So this is an example, a clear example of how we have to work horizontally across all these issues that are embedded in the need for less inequality, greater inclusion, more economic democracy. There are also networks at the national level and at the local level. Cities have organized. There are networks across Europe called Rêve, which in French actually means dreams. There is an organization based in Montreal called Cities, which brings different municipalities together and municipal governments that are engaged in the social economy. And GSEF, the Global Social Economy Forum, and its ability to draw together, to gather, mobilize cities around the world. Next one, please. The social and solidarity economy confuses people because of its diversity and because it has roots in the cooperative movement. That's, and we don't want to refer to old and new in the sense that there's a break, but rather that there's a continuity. And the cooperative movement is the heart and soul of the social and solidarity economy. But as it has evolved, we now have nonprofit organizations which are engaging in market activity. It's a commercial model, and we want to be able to demonstrate that these are new, new business models. Also, that social and solidarity economy enterprises produce all kinds of goods in addition to services. They are present in all sectors, from traditional manufacturing to information technology, and increasingly in the digital economy with the rise of platform cooperativism, for example, and then in a variety of social service activities, daycare, home care, housing sector, etc., etc. The diversity of the social economy finds its complementarity in the diversity of definitions adopted by different countries. And I don't think this is a bad thing. I think that we just need to put them all under a common umbrella and respect the institutional contexts that give rise to a different definition in a different national context. So in Quebec, the social and solidarity economy is exclusively collective, cooperative, and nonprofit enterprises. So it doesn't exclude private social enterprises, but in its definition, it is restricted to collective enterprises. In other contexts, private companies are part of the social and solidarity economy, and increasingly we see innovations, B corporations, for example, or community interest companies in the UK, and we have community interest companies now, and community benefit companies in Canada, in the east and west coast of our country. If we go to some of the countries in the south, for example, Brazil, the popular or informal economy forms the largest segment of the social and solidarity economy. That created a conundrum for people trying to assess exactly what it is. But when you have more than half the population in rural economy operating in the popular informal sector, but working collectively with food provision and social services, this is also part of the social and solidarity economy. Next slide, please. So we have to take account of these different contexts. We need, or those of us who've been working in this area for a long time, as I mentioned earlier, have three perspectives that we always use. One is the micro, looking at the enterprises themselves. The second, however, it's really important, and that's the macro perspective, to see the social and solidarity economy in the context of a macro policy environment and to see it as a partner in social and economic development objectives. And this is a challenge in many parts of the world, and I think that we have achieved this in Quebec. It doesn't mean we've gotten all the results we want, but it is part of a macro policy environment. And in order to be able to address the SDGs in their ensemble, we have to have an enabling macro environment to which I'll return. But also we've discovered, and this we discovered internationally, we've done several studies around the world and on different continents, that for all of this to be very effective, we need intermediaries. We need institutional settings that are between these enterprises and the state, so as to not have the old way of having a programmatic approach to social and solidarity economy, top-down. Even with the best of intentions, there is too much distance between the needs of the social solidarity economy and those programs that are initiated, drafted in national governments, regional, and even local governments. Even at the local level, these intermediaries that bring together stakeholders are extremely important, and I will come back to that in a moment. So what I wanted to focus on as the transformative capacity of the social and solidarity economy, and that we have to work beyond the focus on enterprises alone. You know, having an inventory of those enterprises and what sectors they exist in, what are their impacts, absolutely. But to move from that to a larger, more ecosystem approach. The other thing which is really important is that national contexts are extremely different, and what we have resisted in Quebec, and I know my colleagues have resisted, is for the social and solidarity economy not to be misunderstood and appropriated as a way in which to allow states, governments to disengage, because this has been a tendency. And I don't want to tar, nations with the same brush, but very much focus of the Anglo-American approach to social and solidarity economy, particularly social enterprise, which is not the case in Quebec, it's not the case in Europe, and it's not the case in many developing countries. So this is not a way to allow governments to bow out and contract out, and we have to resist that at all times. Here's just, and it's no doubt incomplete, a lexicon of the different terms that are used today internationally. I'm sure I have forgotten some. On the left are the ones that have been around now for quite some time. Social innovation, you'll see right in the middle, is now part of the vocabulary. It's a process, but it's also equated with these kinds of initiatives. Third sector has disappeared. Yeah. For a long time we talked about third sector. Prior to that, and with due respect, we talked about voluntary sector, and it's a big mistake that it has disappeared. It's off the radar in these discussions, which it should not be. But third sector is no longer, people are not doing third sector research. Social entrepreneurship, community economic development, and look on the right, because this was dinner last night, and we were discussing, these are the newer concepts that have arrived on the scene, and this is very good. A lot of it is aspirational. A lot of this is young people who are paying attention to the SDGs and want resilient societies and want sustainable development and green economies that are genuinely embedded in communities. But what's happening, which is really worrying, is that they are giving rise to silos of groups that are doing extremely important work that are not collaborating with each other. And when we discuss, I'm willing, I hope to have questions. In our view, the social and solidarity economy, if we see it from a macro perspective, is an umbrella term. It embraces, it takes into account these initiatives because they are all community-based, people-based, from the ground up, bottom up, as we used to say, and usually primarily the result of collective action. But now we have conferences on all these subjects, and they don't come together. So I think that this is an extremely important challenge for us to be able to move into this world of respecting the vocabulary, but making it part of a common goal. Otherwise, the fragmentation will make it much more difficult to achieve the SDGs, except in a siloed fashion, which I don't think is the goal of the United Nations. So the next slide, please. And here I will go quickly, but in Quebec, we have developed what we call an ecosystem, and this has been a long time in coming. The Quebec governments, and it's non-partisan, and I think that's really important. We have a variety of different political parties. There's an election coming up in October, no idea what will happen. But the social and solidarity economy is non-partisan, and it has been recognized as an economic actor and as an engine capable of generating socioeconomic transformation. But we couldn't do that if it was just the enterprises alone. You need development tools. And those tools have been built over time by actors in collaboration with researchers, in collaboration with different government offices. And those tools include financial tools, enterprise development tools, labor market tools, research tools. We have a big research network, as I mentioned earlier, that works in partnership, and public policy tools. And those public policy tools have not been simply the result of lobbying government, but rather working with government at the same table, so that this is why we use this term, which is now also quite popular, co-construction. We have been co-designing, co-constructing public policy in the social economy since 1996, but even earlier, but really the watershed moment for us was 1996. We have framework legislation in Quebec now, which is an all-encompassing law that recognizes the social and solidarity economy as a socio-economic actor. And what is really important is that that framework legislation was drawn up by several ministries. That was an innovation in and of itself, to get all these ministries to sit down at the same table. Researchers and practitioners were all part of the stakeholder community that put together this framework legislation. That was voted unanimously, by the way, in Parliament. All parties voted in favor. So you can see this is just a diagram that illustrates the system, the ecosystem in Quebec. And you'll see in the middle there's a network, and this is what I referred to earlier as the intermediaries. This is its French name, Chantier de l'économie sociale, which literally means task force on the social economy. It was created in 1996, and the fact that it's still called a task force is actually quite extraordinary, but it's okay because it means that it's constantly inventing, reinventing, innovating. It's a process. But you can see all the different tools that feed into the network and feed out. And then cutting across those are the co-construction of public policy and knowledge transfer. Knowledge is transferred not in the traditional sense of the researchers who then provide research outcomes to practitioners. Knowledge transfer is horizontal between practitioners. It is vertical between researchers and practitioners, and vertical between practitioners and researchers. So co-construction is really a process that's embedded in Quebec. I like this quote by John Dewey. I'd like to it's only one line so I can read it. Hardest problems are those which institutions cannot handle. These are public problems. And so we have an urgent need for institutional innovation to meet the SDGs. The SDGs are extremely important, invaluable goals. But within the existing institutional framework, there's just going to be roadblocks because of the siloed approach that tends to cut and slice and effectively produce results but not see the entire picture. So horizontally, within countries, across ministries and departments, vertically, multi-scalar links between local, regional, and national governments, and with stakeholders, developing, not just ad hoc partnerships, but an ongoing process of dialogue which requires creating institutional space. So I mentioned that we have this history in Quebec. I'd like to just draw your attention to the consequence of not operating in this manner. And the consequence, and I don't have this as a mantra, this was based on studies that we did in 10 different countries where we explored how public policy meeting, in some cases, social inclusion, in other cases, directly social and solidarity economy, were or were not achieving their goals. Where there are not these links that are embedded in the process, the risk is policy incoherence. You have one set of policies at the local level, but they're not facilitated by national policies or regional policies. It makes it impossible to achieve the goals or to achieve them effectively. So the risk of policy incoherence is very high, and the misalignment of policy measures with the goals that are being sought. I just took a quote out from one of these studies that we did, which is actually published in UNRISD, that demonstrated to us the absolute urgency for policy coherence vertically across different levels of government. Next slide, please. So if we are able to work across silos, create networks within the social and solidarity economy, build bridges with the new initiatives, circular, collaborative, sharing, green, etc., work horizontally with different levels of government, encourage participation, create dialogic spaces with stakeholder presence. This is a win-win situation for governments, and I think that's something we have managed to convince the Quebec government of, because their transactions costs are considerably reduced and the information asymmetries are reduced as well. The closer you are to your problem or your challenge, the higher your chances are of meeting that. Your transactions cost, in some cases, go to zero, and governments face very, very high transaction costs. And I'd like to just finish off, if you may, next slide, please, that again, there's so many exciting and wonderful initiatives going on around the world, and in a sense, almost too many, because they are disparate and there's very little conversation. When I was doing some of this research, and many of you might know of these institutions, there's a lot of experimentation going on in policy innovation, and particularly in the European Union, where Denmark's Mind Lab is actually quite well known right now. And the European Union has put together a fantastic study that looks at all innovations that are ongoing within EU conversations. These are experiments, but they dovetail, they correspond very much with the issues that we are facing, how to reach SDGs. So how can we bring some of these conversations of achieving SDGs and these policy innovation discussions together? Because I fear, and I repeat this again, that if we don't do this, that we will have many disappointments, even if in certain areas of the 17 we have some major achievements. In this book that was edited by Peter Routing by UNRISD, I'm not going to read this, you can read it yourself, but the conclusion that they draw in this collection is that, you know, it's like treating symptoms as opposed to treating root causes. And if we're not addressing the actual root causes, which require these broad horizontal discussions, we are constantly going to be applying palliative Band-Aid solutions, which don't have a long-term perspective that we would, I think, share here. And then very last slide. We were at a meeting in Montreal recently, and I couldn't think of a term And I had this oxymoron, instituted flexibility, which makes no sense, because if something's flexible, you don't want to institutionalize it, but you have to. So I think this is the key thing, that it's difficult. Large institutions, whether it's huge United Nations or a local government, a municipal government, has its structures. These are embedded in culture. There's a mindset. These are good people, but they have their divisions and their tasks and so on. There has to be a process of innovation within government, because all the social innovation discussion that we talk about is outside the framework of decision-making by policymakers. And for the time being, often they are hamstrung because they don't have enough flexibility to be able to work collaboratively with actors. And I think for the SDGs within national contexts, this call for some form of institutionalized flexibility and greater role for stakeholders is absolutely called for. And in a small place like Quebec, we see the benefit of working in this manner. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Dr. Il-Chang Lee from UNRISD. He is actually going to put next probably linkage that we have missed probably in the Agenda 2030, because if you look at 17 goals, you might think that, well, all what you have heard about the social and solidarity economy is very good, but you don't find social solidarity economy in none of the 17 goals. So what is the link between this potential of social solidarity economy to implement SDG goals and those 17 goals which you would look with very siloed approach? I think exactly in the spirit of Professor Mendell, Dr. Il-Chang Lee, he's going to show how when local government is developing more integrated and coordinated approach to the co-construction of public policy, how we could actually address all or different SDG goals through social solidarity economy. So let me invite Dr. Il-Chang Lee.
UNRISD is an autonomous and independent research institute within UN system. And our institute was established in 1963 with a mandate to suggest alternative approach to mainstream ideas of development. In those days, in 1960s and 70s, the development was understood as economic growth. But some prominent political economists in Europe suggested to have a UN institute to focus on development in society, social development, which is kind of a countermeasure to economic growth-oriented development strategies. So since the UNRISD established in 1963, our institute has been focusing on social development and especially kind of alternative approach to development, including all those elements ignored by mainstream ideas. So our approach to sustainable development goals and more broadly the 2030 agenda itself is kind of alternative to mainstream ideas. So maybe you can find something different from major discourses or main discourses you can hear from UN agencies in my presentation. First of all, I may have to begin with very much inconvenient truth about the 2030 agenda. Even though you achieve all those 17 goals in your country or in your society, that does not necessarily guarantee that your society can be transformed into a better form. This is chilling truth because those goals and targets are just targets and goals. I mean, Professor Mendell talked about institutions and policies, importance of institutions and policies. And if you cannot change institutions and policies to generate inequality and poverty, even though you achieve those goals, you cannot have better society, better town, better villages. So that means we have to identify transformative means, transformative policies, transformative institutions. The reason why our institute is focusing on social and solidarity economy is we found some transformative potentials in this social and solidarity economy. And this is closely related to our topic today, localization of the SDGs. Sometimes I have so many questions about the meaning of localization of the SDGs. What are the meanings of the localized SDGs or localization of the SDGs? I mean, there were so many kind of international initiatives in the past to localize the internationally agreed development goals. The most prominent example in the past is the local Agenda 2021, following the 1992 Earth Summit. You know, all those villages and local governments started to having their own sustainable goals. But there were some kind of limitations in those initiatives. First of all, you know, it was not the kind of a binding international agreement. So they let local governments and villages pick and choose, kind of the goals which are appropriate to their own situation. So they were not kind of the necessary goals chosen by many local governments. And the local Agenda 2021 did not pay much attention to political aspects of development. For instance, how to empower people, to change their power relations and all that. So the SDGs localization is a bit different from this past experience because in the preamble of 2030 agenda, we can find so many emphasis on empowerment and the empowerment of the marginalized people and disadvantaged people. So it pays attention to political aspects. So in localization of the SDG process, we have to pay attention to this political aspect of the SDGs. And why SSE is important in this context? Because as Professor Mendell said, social and solidarity economy has so many relevant elements to sustainable development goals, and one of them is empowerment and democratic self-management within and beyond organizations, and solidarity too. So that's why it is quite important to identify the important contribution social and solidarity economy can make in the context of SDGs. And that's why we started looking at different cases of social and solidarity economy in different places. And we did 1 year research on Seoul case. I hope you can pick up that our summary of this report. And it is about Seoul's experience, about how to grow social and solidarity economy in local context, and how they link the development of social and solidarity economy with SDGs. Why we chose Seoul as a case study? Because there are several reasons. First of all, at the national level, South Korean government established so many counter-cyclical measures responding to financial economic crisis in the 1990s and global economic crisis in 2008, and they were very much successful in a way. They did not, they did not have very severe damages caused by those global level economic crisis, and they quickly recovered from the crisis. And one of those counter-cyclical measures was social and solidarity economy. So government at the national government level, they paid attention to social and solidarity economy as a counter-cyclical measure. And one of the distinctive features of this social and solidarity economy promoted by the national government is that it grew in the context of expansion of welfare state, which is different from other Anglo-American cases. So government expanded welfare state, and in parallel, they expanded social and solidarity economy. So that's one of the reasons why we chose South Korea, especially Seoul, as a case study. And Seoul, if you look at the local election process in Seoul, I mean the progressive government in Seoul expanded social and solidarity economy drastically, but they also paid great attention to ecosystem, which was mentioned by Mendell, Professor Mendell. So it is not only about growing, the number of social and solidarity economy enterprises and organizations, but they also try to establish some kind of ecosystem within which social and solidarity economy organizations and enterprises can flourish. So we were very much interested in how they did it and how those efforts can contribute to achieving sustainable development goals and achieving transformation of Seoul and South Korea. This report is composed of 7 chapters, and the second chapter is about a general kind of review about localization of SDGs and how SSE can contribute to SDGs. We focused on 5 dimensions: economic, social, environmental, governance, and financing. So you can find SSE's contributions to those 5 dimensions. For instance, in the social dimension, SSE can deliver social service by strengthening peer networks and the village network. So it can empower people through delivery process of social services. So it is not only about delivering social service, but also about empowering people. So people can be empowered when they deliver social services. And economic dimension, social and solidarity economy can respond to locally distinctive assets. So for instance, in your local context, I mean, you can find locally distinctive capitals. It can be cultural capitals, it can be economic capitals, or it can be social fabrics. And social and solidarity economy enterprises and organizations can utilize those locally distinctive assets to create wealth. And local social and solidarity economy can reinvest the surpluses created by their own economic activities. This is one of the major differences between multinational companies and social and solidarity economy, because all those surpluses and profits can be channeled through to their own home countries in the case of multinational companies. But if it is local economic institutions, they are concerned about their own local people and local assets. So they can retain surpluses for reinvestment for their local towns. And governance level, it is already mentioned by Professor Mendell, but local social and solidarity economy can deepen democracy by balancing representative democracy with participatory democracy, because it is managed by democratic principles and people are much more proactive in participating in policy making process in local governments. And financing is quite important element for development, and you can find very good example of how social and solidarity economy financing institution can contribute to overcoming financial crisis. If you look at some examples in our report, there is a very good example in Germany. I mean, in Germany, they have local financial cooperatives, financial institutions, and they lended money to people in the midst of crisis, while the formal kind of financial institutions tried to withdraw money lent to people in local context. So there is a kind of a quite strong contrast between local social and solidarity financing institutions and formal kind of for-profit financial institutions. I'm going to talk about a South Korean case in this broad background. First of all, South Korean SE developed by both kind of approaches. I mean, there is a kind of a misunderstanding in researchers doing research on South Korean case that South Korean SSE was kind of promoted by the top-down approach, but actually, South Korean SSE or social economy SE was promoted by both top-down and bottom-up approach. So bottom-up approach was normally linked up with the anti-authoritarian democratic movement, and when they had the opportunity under the democratic regime, they had a very good environment and that they could cooperate with the government, democratic government. And as I said, growth of SSE was accompanied with the expansion of welfare state. That is very important fact about social economy of South Korea. And even though there are so many good things in social and solidarity economy, especially in terms of its contribution to addressing poverty problems and job creation problems, but there are kind of competing paradigms against this kind of poverty alleviation oriented SSE. Poverty alleviation itself is not problematic from the perspective of SSE, but if it just focuses on poverty alleviation only, it cannot be scaled up. So there is a kind of alternative approach to this poverty alleviation oriented SSE, which is called transformative approach. So they are not only focusing on poverty alleviation, they are also focusing on how to scale up SSE, how to change economic structure, how to make plural economy in which SSE can be a major economic actor. So there are kind of two competing paradigms, and they are in tensions. I mean, even though South Korean government has a kind of the established policy which is somehow coherent in one ministry, but within one ministry they have different views about SSE as well. So whenever we look at the experience of different places, I mean, we have to identify these tensions between different ideological directions or strategical directions, and then we can identify opportunities to make it better. And in Korean case, there are poverty alleviation oriented SSE and transformation oriented SSE. Social economy in Seoul is very much outstanding among other regional contexts or regional SEs in South Korea, because South Korean capital Seoul is the center of everything. I mean, it is center of politics, center of cultural activities, center of economic activities. So it is center of civil society activities too, civil society organizations. I mean, you have so many civil society organizations and headquarters, especially headquarters of civil society organizations in Seoul. And obviously, naturally, the SE has been expanded dramatically compared to other regions. And when they have a progressive metropolitan government, which is current mayor's government, the policies changed from direct support to an ecosystem approach, which means, I mean, it doesn't mean that they did quit the support for SSE, but they provided direct supports, but they also focus on establishment of ecosystems. So they established intermediaries and they established some kind of mechanisms through which SSE can sell goods and services to the government. So under the current mayor's government, SE increased dramatically. If you look at the overview, you have statistics about how dramatic the growth of SE in Seoul was. But even though they had a very good success in terms of growth of number of SE organizations and enterprises, there are limits. First of all, there is a kind of a subsidy dependence. It is still, the social economy is still lacking in terms of activities to create enough wealth to sustain by themselves. So there is a subsidy dependence, and secondly, there's a political sustainability concern. Quebec case, I mean, it is non-partisan, so they are not very much affected by power change at the local level. But in Seoul, SE is considered, social economy is considered as political kind of symbol of current mayor government. So, some SE organizations belonging to opposition party are very much reluctant to join the forces as a SE. So there is a kind of political sustainability concern, because if there's any power change, what will happen? Nobody knows. And siloed bureaucracy. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I will finish within 5 minutes. And the siloed bureaucracy. So we have a kind of a siloed bureaucracy and fragmented bureaucracy. And there is a kind of a upward barriers in wage. I mean, could you go to the next slide, please? If you look at this graph, within the bottom 19% wage scale, average wage of SSE is higher than for-profit enterprises. That means SSE can contribute to poverty alleviation, and it can contribute to redistribution. But beyond 90% of wage scale, the average wage of SE is far lower than the average wage of for-profit companies. So there is a kind of problem of residualization of SE. So people with low pay and low skill are sticking to SSE rather than highly educated, highly skilled people. So that is problem we have in Seoul. But I think it contributed a lot to economy and employment, and especially social returns are far higher than for-profit companies. So if you spend $1, for instance, I mean, you can get $13 of social returns in the case of social economy, but in the case of for-profit companies, it's $0.7. So you have very good contribution made by social and solidarity economy. Next slide, please. And in the case of environmental contribution, they have potential to generate 12% Seoul's total solar energy. And in terms of contribution to democratic governance, I mean, we surveyed, and you have very good indicators about people's awareness about solidarity and democracy, importance of inclusion in the case of SE compared to other organizations. Then how SE contribute to how can SE contribute to achieving Seoul's SDGs. Seoul government announced Seoul's SDGs last November. And obviously, these SDGs are different from global level SDGs. And if you look at this, this is a global level SDGs, and you have hierarchical systems of goals here. And next slide, please. This is Seoul's SDGs, and you have different pictures. So obviously, they have their own kind of SDGs. And next slide, please. This picture shows how social and solidarity economic organizations and enterprises can contribute to Seoul's SDGs. So that box size of the rectangular box indicates how many social economy enterprises and organizations in Seoul work on that specific goal. So for instance, you have goal 1, 10, 8, 11, 3, 4, 9, 12 are the which are worked by SEs mainly. So those goals are addressed by many SE organizations and enterprises. But other goals are relatively, less addressed by or SE organizations and enterprises. So through this analysis, we found so many things about Seoul's SE experience, which can be helpful for policymakers in other local contexts to develop their own SE policies and institutions. First of all, subsidy is important, but it can cause some negative impacts in terms of economic sustainability or financial sustainability. And participatory public-private governance is quite important, but you have to be very careful about partisanship, political partisanship, which can make SE organizations and political symbols of specific political party. Bureaucratic silo, you have to address that bureaucratic silo problem. And it is quite important to dismantle that upward barrier of wage. Even though it is important to help low-skilled people, but you are not supposed to stick to that low-skilled and low-educated people only. And new generation is quite important to expand SE activities, but if you cannot sort out that wage problem, you cannot attract young ones, highly educated young ones. And structural constraints cannot be addressed by local government. I mean, there is a role which should be played by national government. So you have to, make a kind of a good coalition between national government and local government, and you have to find a way to push national and local government to establish policies for SE. So you can draw the lessons from these findings, and the more details can be found in this report. And UNRISD is going to have, we announced call for papers to identify good experiences, good practices in different local areas. And the deadline is the 2nd of August. So if you have good cases and good practices in your local context, please contact me, and we can have a discussion about how to develop your ideas into papers. Thank you so much.